Going on, team? Welcome to the I guess, the first episode of this series called Dividing Doctrines. I'm going to be starting looking at the different doctrines in Christianity that divide us. Um, yeah, it's going to be breaking those down and kind of sharing my belief on the many topics within those dividing doctrines that we're going to talk about. Today, we're talking about the law or the role of the law in the Christian life today. We're talking about the law of Christ. Um, are the two different? Are there similarities in them? But yeah, we're just gonna dive into that today. But yeah, so I'm just gonna share some scriptures that I got, some scriptures that I found freeing in my own personal research on this topic. So that's what this channel is, just me putting out my beliefs, even for myself. This is really just like a thing for me to look back on to keep myself sharp on my Bible. But yeah, so let's dive into that real quick. But yeah, so just to kick it off, I got some verses here. I got a bunch of verses here for us. So, you know, before I really get into the topic, these first two verses are kind of just, just kind of my motto and kind of stuff I just try and live by. So, First Thessalonians, here it says, but test everything, hold fast to what's good, and we'll be in ESV because it's just easier. I'm not too good with the these and thou, so but yeah, so test everything, hold fast was good. So like that's just me. Like I like to ask questions. I'm very inquisitive. I'm always asking why. Always need like an extra explanation. It's good in some areas of my life, but sometimes it can get me in trouble. But um, for the Bible, I think it's really good, and I think all Christians should always test it. Put your beliefs to the test. See opposition, so you can really know the truth. And if you're really solid on it, you don't want to be on sinking sand. Um, so the next one is First Peter. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asked you for a reason for your hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. So that's my aim of this channel. There's gonna be people who I disagree with, or people disagree with me, and I welcome disagreement as long as it's with respect. And we can have a disagreement and have respectful conversation at the same time. Um, but yeah, so I'm always questioning things, and I want to be able to give a defense for what I believe in, what has given me hope. Um, but yeah, a little bit about, just to say my official stance on this, just not to get confused. I believe that Christians are under the law of Christ now. These are the life and teachings and ethical teachings of Jesus, his commands, his example. I like to think of it as like, what did Jesus do? What did he say? What does he want us to do? I believe the New Testament is clear, and the Bible is clear that the Mosaic Law, along with the Old Covenant, is obsolete, meaning no longer used or produced, or it's out of date. So, with the Mosaic Law rendered obsolete, we are no longer under those laws in the New Covenant. We are under the law of Christ. Yeah, so first I wanted to talk about a little bit about what the law of Christ is for those of us who don't know. Just give just brief, I guess, summary or brief bullet points on it. We'll start with the Mosaic Law. So the law of Moses refers to the covenantal instructions that God gave Israel through Moses after bringing them out of Egypt. It's primarily found in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It was given to form Israel into God's covenant people. It helped shape them into a holy nation. The law exposed the death of sin of the people. That's what Romans talks to us about. It helped govern God's people under the specific covenant. This covenant had blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. It's all throughout the Old Testament. You can find those in Deuteronomy 28. And also the Mosaic Law pointed to Christ. It was a temporary guardianship, and we'll get into that idea later in this video. So moving on, like, what is the law of Christ? So like I said before, it's Jesus' teachings, Sermon on the Mount, parables, commands, apostolic instruction in the New Testament. It is internal. It's written on our hearts, not on stone. That's one of the differences. Um, it's not a repackaging of the Mosaic Law, contrary to what some people may think, but it's a new covenant framework. And it's important to understand covenantal relationship within the Bible because makes a lot of things clear when we talk about some of these topics. One thing about the law of Christ is obedience under the law of Christ flows from faith and transformation, not from earning righteousness. So it's just very important to put out as we continue. But moving forward, we're going to get into some of these verses. Um, so we're starting off with he in Romans. Um, so let's read it. It says, "In speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what has become obsolete and is growing old is ready to vanish away." So I mean that's kind of clear. So we got to see if this if the law is even connected to the first one. So what is this first one that we're talking about and stuff? So we'll get into that. So Romans 10:4, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. So we see that there was some sort of transformation when Christ died on the cross for us. Um, and let me do one more before I get into my notes. Okay. Galatians 3:23 through 25. Now, before faith came, we were held captive under the law, imprisoned until the coming faith would be revealed. So then, the law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian. Okay, so I feel like these two are it's pretty good to set it off, So we see the first one we see, Hebrews kind of shows us that um, it's not that God's moral principles disappeared, but it's the covenant system given through Moses that has been replaced by the covenant of grace through Christ. So it's important. So it's not so much that the law or just that specifically. Some people think that sometimes we try and attack the law or attack certain things, but no, it's the whole covenant system. So that includes anything under that covenant system we've established. Romans helps us understand that Christ fulfilled the law and brought the righteousness requirements that came with it to its intended conclusion. We find righteousness in Christ, not in keeping the law. Galatians is the home run, letting us know that the law was a temporary tutor or guardian that prepared Israel for Christ. Once Christ came, there was no need for a tutor. But in this new, but here's the new concept, or is this even a new concept, or was this foretold? And we can see that in Jeremiah. So, sorry, I'm dealing with different screens here. Um, so yeah, let's go to Jeremiah 31, and let's get there. Tripping. Okay, so we see in Jeremiah that there was a new covenant that was prophesied to come. This is always the intent. So it says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the old covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall know me, from the least to them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more." So God told us that this would happen, and this is clear that what that old covenant was. It was when they brought them out of the land of Egypt, and um, all the 613 laws were that covenant. That was to separate them as a holy people. Um, so we see that there was prophesied in Jeremiah there was going to be a time that that old covenant was going to be done away with. Like it was always intended to end. So let's move forward to the next few verses in Ephesians and Colossians. For he himself is our peace, who made us both one and has broken down his flesh, the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace. So we see this whole idea, when Christ did what he needed to do, he broke down that dividing wall of hostility between Jews and Gentiles, and brought us into one making us one out of two, um, and he's making peace. So this whole point of Christ basically um, tearing down that wall and bringing us one together was to create one people, just like it said in Jeremiah. So in Colossians 2, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its illegal demands, this he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them. 16 says, therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food, drink, or regard to festival, new moon, or Sabbath. These are shadow of things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. So in Ephesians, we see that law of commandments and ordinances refers to the ceremonial and civil laws that separated the Jews and Gentiles. Jesus' death removed that barrier. In Colossians, it's explicitly clear that all the things in the Mosaic system pointed to Christ, or in this old covenant pointed to Christ. Um, Once the substance of Christ arrives, the shadow has no purpose and it's fulfilled. Just kind of just thinking, say you're sitting down and someone's walking towards you, you see the shadow, but once that person arrives, it's like there's no point in the shadow because that person is here. That was what Christ was, and that's the shadow is these old ordinances. The shadow is all these things, the old covenant. It all pointed to Christ. You literally look at any of the laws in the 613, they all pointed to Christ. So now we're going to look at, where is this law of Christ mentioned? For me, when I started reading things for myself, I would see this and it really wouldn't make sense to me. And I would be like, I guess it is what it is, but it could be this, it could be that. But I had an itch to really find out what this really was. So we see two verses here in Galatians 6:2. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Another place it came up was in 1 Corinthians. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. So like these kind of verses just kind of sparked up, and I'm sure I missed a few, but these verses are like explicit in letting us know there's this thing called the law of Christ. It isn't made up. It's not a made up thing that a new believers or New Testament Christians or whatever label you want to put on people might have, that this is a thing that's from the Bible. So before I get into like some more scripture, there's a few things I want just to remember about the law of Christ. So number one, the law of Christ is not a continuation of the law of the Mosaic Law. Just because explicitly we can see 9 of the 10 commandments were reiterated or reemphasized, it doesn't mean that this is a continuation of the law. And not even just of the 10 commandments. Just because there's reiteration of any of the 613 laws, it doesn't mean it's a continuation or that previous is still binding. The law of Christ is a separate thing from the Mosaic Law. Number two, there are distinct differences between the two. Just a quick example, we can look at dietary and we can look at the Sabbath. So here, 2 verses in Romans and Colossians I have. So we'll start here. Romans 14. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. One person esteems one day as better than another, while another person esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. Colossians 2:16. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you. We already read this, but it's just good to just bake it in our mind, on you in questions of food or drink, or with regard to festivals, new moon or Sabbath. These are a shadow of things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. So we see Paul, he mentioned previously that he's under the law of Christ. Paul was also inspired by the Holy Spirit, very pivotal in the Christian text, Christian sacred writing. You can see here he had a different prioritization that maybe the Mosaic Law might have had. It's clear. He's basically saying, don't judge people on the days they worship, on festivals, new moon, Sabbath. He's saying all these things were a shadow to come, and the Lord is here, so he has a different prioritization. Just a complete 180. See if you're baked having if you're a Jewish believer at this time, or a Jewish convert into Christianity, this would be hard, and it's hard for some of us who maybe are maybe stuck on those 10 commandments, or maybe stuck on the issue of the Sabbath. It can seem contradictory, and you maybe have to spin things up, or maybe say that he wasn't talking about the Sabbath, or the 10 Commandment Sabbath. He was talking about different ceremonies that, or different man-made Sabbath rules that they had. But I think it's very clear what he's talking about here. When you have a specific hermeneutic, this is very clear. It's very easy. Um, but yeah, so but in easy combat to that, you can tell the people to look at the original text in Greek, and they can understand the intent and meaning in the word at the time it was written. A quick, I mean, we can just do that now. You can quickly go to BibleHub.com. You can click the verse, and everything is kind of made kind of quite simple, and it makes sense when we read it in that type of way. Let me pull that up. For All right, so let's go here. So it's BibleHub.com. Share this tab. It's got to load. Oh, it was already here. Yeah, so BibleHub.com. Obviously, click to whatever verse you want. So we were in Colossians 2. So yeah, we see here, it's tripping. So we see here, we're gonna go ahead and click whatever version you want, and you can even click, um, you can click this verse. What verse was it on? And go to the verse that you want to click. So we're at Colossians 2:16. I'm staying in the English Standard Version. I might have just redone my steps. Anyways, so yeah, don't do that. Go to we were already correct. So yeah, you go here, you click the Greek. Here, this is a pretty good start. I mean, it's a free service really to help you understand the content or the intent of certain words. So we go here. It's this word Sabbaton, or tone, whatever it is. So we click this Strong's, this reference number, this link, and here you can see all the different occurrences that it had. You can see here, this Sabbaton. There's talking about ceremonial Sabbath. Um, where they talking about ceremonial Sabbath here in Matthew. Where they talking about ceremonial Sabbath, we can go down here, like they were on the synagogue on the Sabbaton. It's the same word that they used in the Colossians text that we're reviewing. And to even understand, Paul's point, we can kind of go in different instances in Corinthians. Yeah, it says here of the Sabbath day. First of the week. There's different, it can mean different things. But just trying to get the general understanding of the general intent. Every Sabbath, the same Sabbaton day. So that's just, it's an easy rebut for people who try to say when he meant this, he didn't mean, the Sabbath that people kind of keep to that still to this day, or it didn't mean the 10 Commandment Sabbath. It meant like a made up, man-made perversion of the Sabbath. Um, so yeah, good. Um, it's a good resource, I think, that you should tap into. It's really helped me. So yeah, I think the Bible is very clear. on- So yeah, I think the Bible is pretty clear on if someone wants to keep the Sabbath, the Israel Sabbath, they can. That's great. If someone wants to keep a different day, we're not to judge anybody on that. We don't pass judgment on this topic. We shouldn't pass judgment. Period. But I think the Bible is pretty clear on what this means, and that's one of the distinct differences in the law of Christ, which Paul was under, and the Mosaic Law. So we're getting kind of into the next difference. I talked about how there was Sabbath and dietary. These are just two of the many examples. So here we are with the dietary. We have Mark and Romans. So with Mark, he says, and he said to them, then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him? There's not his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled. thus declaring all foods clean. It's pretty clear there. Um, so Romans 14, do not, for the sake of food, destroy the work of God. Everything is indeed clean, but it is wrong for anyone to make another stumble by whatever he eats. Yeah, so it's just different teachings. Obviously in the Mosaic Law, have you couldn't eat different things. But specifically in the Old Covenant, external things could defile you. You couldn't touch certain things. You couldn't touch certain people. Um, there's a story about Peter. He felt like he was in violation or he switched up because he was eating with Gentiles, and then Paul had to rebuke him for that. So we've seen the Old Covenant, external things can defile you. But in the New Covenant, and in the law of Christ, it is what's inward that can defile you. An important thing to remember is that about the new covenant is that it grafted everyone into this family of God through faith. It broke down literally anything that can separate the people of God from someone who has faith or believes in Jesus. So, like we read above, two man into one. It brought two groups of people into one group of people. It broke down everything that separated Jews and Gentiles. This was a huge thing. What you can eat. Then the early church struggled with this, since like the Mosaic Law, like there was like the Mosaic food laws effectively separated Israel from Gentiles. These dietary restrictions were put aside to gather everyone in the same covenantal family. Um, I just think of this like little things like sometimes my brain just wonders like like all humans, like what some people are doing wrong, or if some people can get a path for certain things. But like let's just imagine like a person in Alaska, like a remote part of Alaska, where like crab is like a staple. It's like a staple food in the diet, and like an access to a clean meat, might be limited or whatever. But that person turns their life over to Christ. They repent and turn away from sin. And they get clean from a certain former addictions. They believe in the gospel. Will that person be considered defiled or sinful for continuing to eat that crab? Are they any less Christian than those who don't eat crab? So according to this Bible, no. But sometimes it's unfortunate. People use this doctrine to divide other people, and it's okay to eat certain things, to not eat certain things. But we don't pass judgment. We don't say that person doesn't have a right relationship with God. We don't. It's not what we do externally that shows our internal relationship with God. So yeah, that's just something that I like to think about. So we see in my second point how there are two different things: the law of Christ and the Mosaic Law. Um, we see that with the Sabbath. We see that also with the food and dietary. So moving forward to my third point, um, talking about how the law of Christ intensifies specific commands in the law of Moses. So we have the law of Moses. The law was given to Moses, but when Christ came, he intensified some of those laws. He took it to a different level. Let's read these two verses. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Then we see in John 15, Jesus says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." Um, so I don't know if anybody caught it, but because I didn't catch it when I first read this, or I didn't make the connections, because I'm not as well read, but this would hit different. Um, to a Jewish believer, because they would have memorized Torah law. They would have that, and they would be able to click. It's like, oh, like kind of like when we listen to different like lyrics, and then we say, oh, that's a bar. Like we understand that. They would have that's a bar moment. So for example, in the Mosaic Law, we see that self can be the standard. It says love your neighbor as yourself. So I'm to treat someone like I'm to treat myself. In the law of Christ, according to what Christ said, um, this is completely intensified. It's taken to a different level. Christ is the standard. Christ says, love one another as I being intensified. It shifted from self to Christ, along with so much in the Bible. I mean, it's so important to understand what shifted or what Christ shifted or what Christ intensified. It shifted from what I can do to what Christ has done, or what I want to do, or what Christ did for me. Notice how he said, "This is my commandment." The law of Christ is the commands and examples of Jesus. So whenever Jesus says, "This is my commandment," that's what Christians are under today. Um, so for example, like it's like if I have a friend or if someone's like a coworker, under Mosaic law, I'm to treat that person as I want to be treated. I'll treat that person like I'm going to treat myself. But under Christ, no matter what that person does to me, no matter who they are, I have to treat them the way Christ has loved me. That's intensified because I can never love someone the way Christ has loved me, but I can try. So this is another example of how it's different. How the law of Christ is, it's not a continuation from the law of Moses. Just because some things were reemphasized or where he intensified a lot. And this, I just gave one example. Um, my last point, or uh, my last point about the law, the differences, is the motivation for obedience changed. And we see that in these last two, or in these last few verses, in Exodus and Ephesians. So Exodus says, "Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine." So we see in Ephesians, let's contrast. "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us in every blessed us in Christ with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places." So we see one, we keep the covenant, we get blessings. With Christ, He's already given us these blessings, and we respond to Him through that obedience. So in the old covenant, it required obedience to receive the blessing of God. In the new covenant and under the law of Christ, we are already blessed. We are to obey out of gratitude, not out of obligation. Our obedience is a response to this grace that's received. And once it really clicks to you that, once you've made enough mistakes in your life where it's like, I can't earn. I'm not. I don't. I play no part in my salvation. You start to feel the grace. You start to feel the beauty. You start to feel the peace and understanding that I really am loved, and He loves me regardless. He's blessed me with certain spiritual gifts. He's blessed me with certain things in my life that I truly don't deserve, and because of that, it makes me want to be obedient more. Um, the Bible often is, this walk with Christ is often, talks about the bride and groom and how Christ is the bride, the church is, or Christ is the groom and the church is the bride. And it often talks about, this relationship, when we leave Him, or when we do things like commit sin, or we do things not according to His will, it's often referred to as spiritual adultery. And so when we think about a relationship now, and say you have someone that you're with, or married to someone, and you continuously cheat on them, and they continue, or they continue to come back and give you grace and still bless you, still show up and do their job. Eventually, something's gonna click and say, "This person loves me. She's been with me through everything," or this seems like there's nothing I can do for her to separate her love from me. And so out of that, it's like, okay, I'm gonna lock it. I'm not gonna step out no more. That's kind of what it's like, and that's what it should be like for a lot of people. Once we realize that we're broken, we're in a fallen state, I need Jesus every day. And there's nothing I can do to, I guess, have that eternal life. He blessed us with that. So those are two distinct differences. They had to keep it if they wanted to be that treasured people. They wanted to have those possessions. They wanted to have all those blessings, but we don't keep God. And a lot of Christians can attest, like when you do your best, when you show up, sometimes bad things still happen, but we know our eternal reward is coming, and we look forward. We keep pressing on towards the goal. So yeah, the motivation for obedience has changed. Yeah, so that's one thing I really like about it, because you can even see that now. Some people who are still under the law, they still talk about how you got to do certain things. It can be discouraging. It can create a stigma of perfectionism, and if I can't be perfect, I'm not even going to try. So that's why it's important. Yeah. So in conclusion, both do have similarities: the Mosaic Law and the Law of Christ. Both function as completely separate things, though. Just because there were some of the 613 laws in the Law of Mosaic Law re-emphasized or reiterated in the Law of Christ, it doesn't mean that it's a continuation. It doesn't mean that they both function in the same way. Um, you know, there are things that we find in the Mosaic Law that we can't find in, say, any of Christ's teachings. How we observe these commandments is very important, because a lot of times people have used these commandments to divide people. Maybe people feel like they're, um, not in a right relationship with God or anything like that. Maybe people feel like they're in error for some of the things they do. This was the whole reason, and we read Jesus came to break down these barriers. And so when we use the word, when we use the Mosaic Law to build barriers, it's not too Christian to do. Um, People at the start of the Christianity, they tried to go backwards, like you read in Acts or even in the Corinthians, and like it's all throughout the New Testament. From the very jump, this isn't a new thing. They tried to always Judaize Christians, and the disciples fought against this very early on, and even after the disciples, like the early martyrs and early Christian fathers, they all fought against this idea of trying to go backwards. Um, but at every attempt in the New Testament, it was handled and addressed with love. Like the more you read the New Testament, the more you'll see this. Um, People historically have tried to use the law to separate and boast. It's no different now. They try to do it in the Bible, and people do it now. The Bible should never be used as a weapon in this way. Christ himself said that my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Kind of just like and I encourage everyone to read Acts 16 to really understand when they had the first Christian council, the Jerusalem Council, and whether or not new Gentiles, or not new Gentiles, but new Christians who were Gentiles had to keep the Mosaic Law. This is in Acts 15. They discuss whether the law is binding on Christians. So this isn't a new thing. This isn't some new Christian theology. This is something that's been in the Bible. Um, they learned under Christ and decided to not put these burdens on believers. So um, our goal is to live the best way and live as closely as Christ as possible. And disciples understood this, and they taught this. I mean, there's not a single disciple or disciple that taught that we are to be under the Mosaic Law. So that some people can think, well, why don't we do these certain things? But like the reason we don't steal or murder isn't because the Mosaic Law told us not to. It's because of the teachings of Christ and the moral principles reaffirmed through Christ. Um, breaking the law, um, breaking the law like stealing, we're not in violation of the law of Moses when we do that, because we're not under that anymore. The Bible's clear on that. It's a violation under the law of Christ, under the morals, principles, and teachings that Christ gave us. The transition from the Mosaic Law to the law of Christ is flagrant and explicit in the Bible, and something that we can't really ignore. And those of us that read for ourselves, people can explain it away and make it seem like it's things it's not. But if you get away from that specific hermeneutic, trying to explain away certain text so you can fit what you want to do and what you've learned, say culturally, it doesn't make sense, or it will make sense when you put away those things. Um, but yeah, moving forward, I know we've kind of shared um, some of these verses maybe previously. But yeah, Romans Romans 6 says, "For sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under law, but under grace." So this is pure distinction between, we're not under that law anymore, but we're under something else. And for the people who maybe want to challenge what that law meant, just look up the Greek, look up the intent of when this was originally written. Um, Next verse is Galatians. In Galatians, now before faith came, we were held captive under the law, imprisoned until the coming faith would be revealed. So then the law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian. So, I mean, we see a clear transition from law, and then how it's no longer really needed. That's not what justifies us. That's not what reconciles us back to God anymore. That's not what stamps us anymore. Before we were a holy people because of what we could do. Now we're a holy people because of who we believe in and what someone else did for us. Um, but yeah, but to close the video up, to make it explicitly clear what I believe, Mosaic law is no longer binding. I believe this is clear in the Bible. The role of Mosaic law is complete. I guess it's no longer needed. Maybe for looking at, understanding the character and intent or mind of God, maybe, or just understanding different culture, things like that. It's very important to think about it and read about it, and get some sort of wisdom out of it, because it's definitely helpful. But we're no longer to use it to put walls up over people. Um, we're no longer it no longer is binding to our salvation. It's not salvific. It's not, if there's someone who eats something differently than what I eat, I'm not supposed to judge them on it. The Bible is explicitly clear on that. And we understand, just reading the Bible in totality, we understand that Christ has brought a better priesthood, or a priesthood that unites and grabs people together. It doesn't split, so we should never be splitting as his followers. Um, Christ is now the standard. It's not our actions anymore. Um, Rather than adhering to rituals and legal rules, we live in love and reflect on Christ, and that will in turn transform us into who we're supposed to be and who we were created to be. The law of Christ brings Jews and Gentiles together. This is a new covenant that was promised, that was prophesied to come, like we read in Jeremiah. The law of Christ shifts power from self to spirit. So um, I'm thankful for anybody who kind of watched this. I knew it was kind of choppy, but um, I'm truly thankful for those of you that stayed and open to um, any thoughts on it. So if you have opinions on it, leave it in the comments. I'm not infallible. Um, I'm humble. I'm just here trying to do better like everybody else and learn and just share my learning and track my own learning for myself. So yeah, that's my little spiel. Thank you for watching up to this point. More videos to come. Going to try and do better with different beliefs that I have, different learning that I have, and just share with whoever has the time to watch a video like this. And I'm very much into learning together. So um, get in the comment section, message me, do whatever you want to do to engage in any sort of discussion. I'm always looking open to learning and learning new topics or additional understanding. Yeah, so we're all growing together. So thank you for coming in to the next video.